This Can't Be Happening at Macdonald Hall by Gordon Korman, who was 14 when he wrote this in the late 70s. I am reading the 2011 edition. The book was updated in 2003 to reflect proper economic times, which I am a little bit disappointed about since we just read together a book from the 60s where it talked about what school was like in, over 100 years ago in the 19-teens. So this is a story that takes place in the 70s, but has been rewritten to sound like it takes place in the aughts, and the aughts were 20 years ago now, so I don't know why they updated the book like they did. The next book in the series, which I already have, does not have updates and older editions, so don't need to worry about that then. Maybe I will editorialize a little bit about what I think the changes are. I've never read this book, but this first chapter is called It's Always Us. East of Toronto, just off Highway 48, you will find a beautiful tree-lined campus right across the road from the famous Miss Scrimmage's finishing school for young ladies. It is Macdonald Hall, where generations of boys have been educated and prepared for manhood. Named for Sir John A. Macdonald, the hall, with its ivy-covered stone buildings and beautiful rolling lawns, is the most respected boarding school for boys in all of Canada. In Canada, you say? Why, then, is the flagpole in front of the faculty building proudly flying the flag of Malbonia? The answer lies in Dormitory 3, room 306. The window blinds were drawn, but that did not prevent two sets of attentive eyes from peering through the small cracks. They were fixed on the area in front of the faculty building. Nobody's even noticed yet. You'd think this was Malbonia, grumbled Bruno Walton. Let's give it a little time, came the soothing voice of his roommate Boots O'Neill. Just then the headmaster's blue Plymouth turned into the driveway. Instead of driving on into the parking lot, it screeched to a halt in front of the flagpole. The window rolled down, and a familiar head emerged. This is it, Bruno exclaimed. The two boys watched as Mr. Sturgeon got out of his car and stared at the flag as if hoping it would vanish if he looked at it long enough. He sure doesn't look very happy, Boots observed. The fish never looks happy, countered Bruno. No, not unless he's expelling somebody, Boots agreed. Among the boys at Macdonald Hall, Mr. Sturgeon was notorious for his sternness, although to their parents he seemed a kind and understanding administrator who was fond of his students. He just never let them know it. The two boys strained for a better view. A crowd was beginning to gather around the headmaster, who was still staring at the flag as though willing it to be the red maple leaf of Canada. Bruno jumped up from his spot at the window. Okay, everything's in motion. Let's go out and join the crowd. Not me, said Boots, beginning to perspire. The fish will know it's us. Don't be silly. How on earth could he know? It's always us, Boots exclaimed. Come on, Bruno said, pulling his friend up and half dragging him down the freshly painted hallway. We did all the work, and they're having all the fun. Maybe it'll turn into a riot. I love riots. The boys emerged into the yard and melted into the crowd. They could see the entire population of Miss Scrimmage's finishing school watching from across the road. There was a lot of whistling, shouting, and waving from the boys until Mr. Sturgeon began surveying the students with his steely gray eyes. A hush fell. Boots pinched Bruno. The steely eyes had stopped on them. At that moment, the flag of Malbonia was unceremoniously lowered and the maple leaf run up in its place, but not before a number of spectators arriving for the big game had noticed it. The annual hockey game between the Macdonald Hall Macs and the York Academy Cougars was to take place that afternoon. It had been a tradition since 1952, and the feeling of rivalry was intense. Spectators from both sides were pouring in, not just the families of the teams, but everyone who wanted to witness the yearly battle. The Macs were determined to win this one, having been thoroughly trounced in each of their 5 previous meetings. Then there was that wretched cat. The Cougars had a mascot, a 30-pound alley cat sporting the team colors. At every game, she would sit smugly on the players' bench, looking fat and contented. It was too much. Macdonald Hall had no mascot at all, except for a loud cheering section from Miss Scrimmages. Two of the Mac's best players, Bruno Walton and Captain Boots McNeil, were not yet in the dressing room. They were sneaking down the hall of Dormitory 3, trying to subdue a strangely active laundry bag. They stumbled into their room and locked the door behind them. "All right, let her loose," gasped Bruno. "Let her loose?" Boots shrieked. Boots shrieked. She'll rip the room up." "No, she won't. I'll give her a saucer of milk." "A bucket would be more like it." "All right, here goes." The cat erupted from the bag, swiping at Boots's face and scratching him from ear to ear. "Yow, stupid cat!" Boots howled, backing away. The animal stretched, then leapt up onto the bed, where it began making strange groaning noises. "Do you think we hurt her?" Boots asked, rubbing his face. "Nah, she's probably just overfed. I'm sure they stuff her before games so she can look extra fat on their bench." "She'd better be all right," said Boots doubtfully. "She's fine. Come on, let's get going. We're late." As they entered the dressing room, Bruno and Boots gave their teammates the high sign. The first phase of Operation Fat Cat had been successfully completed. "You two are late," Coach Flynn roared. "What's that scratch on your face, O'Neill?" "I cut myself shaving," Boots mumbled, leaning over to tighten his shin pads. Before the coach could respond, the dressing room was filled with laughter. Then the team was called out onto the ice. Bruno and Boots skated their warm-up close together. From the corner of his mouth, Boots hissed, "That scratch on my face is like wearing a sign saying I took the cat." "Relax," Bruno said. "I won't let you take all the blame." "Thanks. That's very comforting." Suddenly, the loudspeaker burst into life. "Attention, please. We regret to announce the disappearance of the York Academy mascot. She is a large gray tabby wearing an orange and black ribbon and a tag bearing the name Myrtle. We would remind the gentlemen of Macdonald Hall that the York Academy team are our guests. We ask that Myrtle be returned immediately to the Cougars bench." "We're in for it now," groaned Boots. "The fish is looking straight at us." "Just wait until they play the anthem," Bruno replied. Boots's heart sank. He had forgotten about that. The loudspeaker broke in again. "Would everyone please rise for our national anthem?" There was the usual scuffling of feet and the crackling of a record. Then a hush fell over the arena, but instead of the solemn opening bars of "O Canada," the air exploded with the throbbing beat of "The Strip." Miss Scrimmage's cheering section went wild. The girls started to bump and grind while their headmistress swooned back into her seat. Even when the record was finally switched, the hubbub continued. Boots could almost feel Mr. Sturgeon's glare burning into his back. But he did the only thing he could think of. Standing at attention, he started to sing "O Canada." Bruno got the message and quickly joined in. Soon both teams were singing. The spectators followed suit, and order was finally restored. The game began in typical fashion. Boots got a goal, and Bruno got a penalty. The Cougars struck back to even the score. It was still 1-1 when the first period ended. In the dressing room, Coach Flynn started into his pep talk. "We've got them, boys," he bawled. "They're playing like a bunch of rejects today." Bruno raised innocent eyes to the coach. "That's because they don't have that stupid elephant cat." Flynn glared at the players. "I hope none of you had anything to do with that cat's disappearance." "No, sir," said Pete Anderson, the goalie. "We have better things to do than play with kittens." As Coach Flynn continued his harangue, Pete nudged Boots, and his voice sank to a whisper. "What'd you do with it?" "It's in our room," Boots muttered. The last I saw of it, it looked like it was dying." "Better not. What would we do with a hot, dead cat?" Before Boots could reply, the buzzer sounded, and the teams took the ice for the second period. Boots and the Cougars captain met at center ice for the face-off. The Cougar boy stared at Boots' face, then suddenly dropped his stick and gloves and wrestled Boots to the ice. "Where'd you get that scratch?" he screamed. "Where's Myrtle?" When the referee finally stopped the fight, the Cougars captain was thrown out of the game for unsportsmanlike conduct. And from then on, all the Cougars were after Boots. Only his speed and Bruno's weight saved him. At the end of the second period, the Macs were ahead by 2 goals. In the dressing room, Coach Flynn gave the team another rousing pep talk. At the end, he turned to Boots and said, "As for you, O'Neill, I know darn well you're too young to be shaving, so if that scratch comes from a cat, I don't want to know about it." Boots remained silent. As the teams poured onto the ice for the third period, Boots skated over to Bruno. Do you think the coach will mention this to the fish? Who cares, Bruno crowed. We're going to win for the first time in 6 years. Boots was about to protest when the buzzer sounded. No sooner was play underway than he took a viciously hard cross-check from a revenge-seeking cougar. Seconds later, an egg came sailing out of the crowd and splattered all over the cougar's sweater. It wasn't hard to locate the source of the egg. Miss Scrimmage looked as if she was going to crawl into a hole. Cries of, "Attaboy, girls, that's showing them," came from the Max bench. The offender headed for the penalty box with yolk dripping down onto his skates. When the final buzzer ended the game, the arena rang with cheers. The Max had won 4-1. As Mr. Sturgeon pushed through the crowd, his expression alternated between a victory smirk and a grim mask. Bruno and Boots showered and dressed hurriedly, mumbling something about having to study. It was time to plant Myrtle on the Cougar's bus. They raced to their room, let themselves in, and stopped dead. There, still on Boots's bed, was Myrtle with 5 kittens. "Look," Bruno gasped, "we're a father. And I thought she was sick. I wish she had been. How are we going to get all of them back on the bus?" "Same way," Bruno decided, "in the laundry bag." Recalling Boots' scratch, he put his hockey gloves and began to pack the mother and kittens into the bag. The 2 boys stole out of the building and over to the Cougar's bus. "I'll unload them. You stand guard," Bruno ordered. A few seconds later, while Bruno was arranging the cats comfortably under a seat, he heard an ominously loud voice say, "Good evening, Mr. Sturgeon. Did you enjoy the game, sir?" "Very much indeed," the headmaster replied cordially. "And may I ask what you are doing at the Cougar's bus?" Before Boots could reply, Bruno emerged. "I knew it, sir! I just knew it! Those York guys didn't even look for their precious mascot. The nerve of them accusing us of kidnapping. Look, there she is, right over there. She just hid under a seat to have her kittens." Mr. Sturgeon smiled crookedly. "Well, I'm extremely relieved to learn that none of the Macdonald boys stooped so low as to kidnap a mascot." "We don't need that kind of help to beat them," Bruno replied. "Just the same, I think you two had better run along," said Mr. Sturgeon. "I wouldn't want to see you accused of any hanky-panky just because you happened to be on the scene." Again, his face adjusted itself into a very strange smile. "Yes, sir," the two chorused, and ran off to their room. "Boy," exclaimed Boots, "we were lucky to get through this day alive." Bruno was rolling on his bed, hysterical with laughter. "Did you see Miss Scrimmage during the anthem? I thought she'd disintegrate." "I don't know," Boots said in a worried tone. "I still think the fish knows about the flag, and the record, and the cat." "How could he?" Bruno scoffed. "We're brilliant." His jubilation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Boots opened it and took a note from the office messenger. It read, Bruno Walton and Melvin O'Neill are to present themselves at Mr. Sturgeon's office immediately following the dinner hour. And that is the end of the first chapter.